Hello everyone, it's your friendly platypus again. I'd like to introduce you to another of my favourite authors, James Baldwin. If you don't know him, I suggest you go look him up. I don't... There aren't enough words in my vocabulary to really describe this amazing man. This one's probably going to be a little bit longer than the last one because I'm going to read his introduction to this book, Nobody Knows My Name. Again, please forgive me, I haven't got my ducks in a row or my shit together. So I'm kind of doing this all on my phone, and in order for me to read and video this, I've got to put my phone down. So I hope you just don't mind. I think the idea is to perhaps just switch off and hopefully listen to my voice, and and it'll either bore you to tears that you'll go to sleep, or it'll soothe you and make you feel some kind of way. I don't know what kind of way, but yeah, that's up to you. But I really hope that you enjoyed James Baldwin. He was one of the most outstanding authors of all time. And there's definitely, he takes pride on my bookshelf. And this book has been read many times, and it's kind of, falling apart. The spine's broken, Oh, and forgive my nails. I swear I'm not, I don't know. I usually do look a little better, but I've been digging around in the garden. Anyway, forgive this super long intro. I'm gonna put my phone down, and please enjoy James Baldwin, Nobody Knows My Name. Nobody Knows My Name. More Notes of a Native Son. Introduction. These essays were written over 6 years in various places and in many states of mind. These years seemed, on the whole, rather sad and aimless to me. My life in Europe was ending, and not because I had decided that it should, but because it became clearer and clearer that I dealt with the streets, the climate, and the temperament of Paris, fled to Spain and Corsica and Scandinavia, that something had ended for me. I rather think now, to tell the sober truth, that it was merely my youth, first youth, anyway, that was ending, and I hated to see it go. In the context of my life, the end of my youth was signalled by the reluctant realisation that I had, indeed, become a writer. So far, so good. Now I would have to go the distance. In America, the colour of my skin had stood between myself and me. In Europe, that barrier was down. Nothing is more desirable than to be released from an affliction, but nothing is more frightening than to be divested of a crutch. It turned out that the question of who I was not solved because I had removed myself from the social forces which menaced me. Anyway, these forces had become interior, and I had dragged them across the ocean with me. The question of who I was had at last become a personal question, and the answer was to be found in me. I think that there was always something frightening about this realization. I know it frightened me. That was one of the reasons that I dawdled in the European haven for so long. And yet, I could not escape the knowledge, though God knows I tried, that if I was still in need of havens, my journey had been for nothing. Havens are high-priced. The price exacted of the haven dweller is that he contrive to delude himself into believing that he has found a haven. It would seem, unless one looks more deeply at the phenomenon, that most people are able to delude themselves and get through their lives quite happily. But I still believe the unexamined life is not worth living, and I know that self-delusion in the service of no matter what small or lofty cause is a price no writer can afford. His subject is himself, and the world it requires every ounce of stamina he can summon to attempt to look on himself and the world as they are. What it came to for me was that I no longer needed to fear leaving Europe, no longer needed to hide myself from the high and dangerous winds of the world. The world was enormous, and I could go anywhere in it I chose, including America, and I decided to return here because I was afraid to. But the question which confronted me, nibbled at me in my stony Corsican exile was, am I afraid of returning to America, or am I afraid of journeying any further within myself? Once this question had presented itself, it would not be appeased. It had to be answered. Be careful what you set your heart upon, someone once said to me, for it will surely be yours. Well, I had said that I was going to be a writer, God, Satan, and Mississippi notwithstanding, and that colour did not matter, and that I was going to be free. And here I was, left with only myself to deal with, and it was entirely up to me. These essays are a very small part of a private logbook. The question of colour takes up much space in these pages. But the question of colour, especially in this country, operates to hide the graver questions of the self. That is precisely why what we like to call the Negro problem is so tenacious in American life and so dangerous. But my own experience proves to me that the connection between American whites and blacks is far deeper and more passionate than any of us like to think. And even in icy Sweden, I found myself talking with a man whose endless questioning has given him himself and who reminded me of Black Baptist preachers. The question which one asks oneself begin, at last, to illuminate the world and become one's key to the experience of others. One can only face in others what one can face in oneself. On this confrontation depends the measure of our wisdom and compassion. This energy is all that one finds in the rubble of vanished civilizations, and the only hope for ours. James Baldwin. Part 1. Sitting in the house. The discovery of what it means to be an American. It is indeed a complex fate to be an American, Henry James observed, and the principal discovery an American writer makes in Europe is just how complex this fate is. America's history, her aspirations, her peculiar triumphs, her even more peculiar defeats, and her position in the world, yesterday and today, are all so profoundly and stubbornly unique that the very word America remains a new, almost completely undefined and extremely controversial proper noun. No one in the world seems to know exactly what it describes. Not even we, motley millions, who call ourselves Americans. I left America because I doubted my ability to survive the fury of the color problem. Sometimes I still do. I want to prevent myself from becoming merely a Negro, or even merely a Negro writer. I wanted to find out in what way the specialness of my existence could be made to connect me with other people instead of dividing me from them. I was as isolated from Negroes as I was from whites, which is what happens when a Negro begins, at bottom, to believe what white people say about him. In my necessity to find the terms on which my experience could be related to that of others, Negroes and whites, writers and non-writers, I proved, to my astonishment, to be as American as any Texas GI, and I found my experience was shared by every other American writer I knew in Paris. Like me, they had been divorced from their origins, and it turned out to make very little difference that the origins of white Americans were European and mine were African. They were no more at home in Europe than I was. The fact that I was the son of a slave and they were the sons of free men meant less. By the time we confronted each other on European soils, than the fact that we were both searching for our separate identities. When we had found these, we seemed to be saying, why, then? We would no longer need to cling to the shame and bitterness which had divided us so long. It became terribly clear in Europe, as it had never been here, that we knew more about each other than any European ever could. And it also became clear that no matter where our fathers had been born, or what they had endured, the fact of Europe had formed us both was part of our identity and part of our inheritance. I had been in Paris a couple of years before any of this became clear to me. When it did, I, like many a writer before me, upon the discovery that his props have all been knocked out from under him, suffered a species of breakdown and was carried off to the mountains of Switzerland. There, in that absolutely alabaster landscape, armed with 2 Bessie Smith records and a typewriter, I began to try to recreate the life that I had first known as a child and from which I had spent so many years in flight. It was Bessie Smith, through her tone and her cadence, who had helped me to dig back to the way I myself must have spoken when I was a pickaninny, and to remember the things I had heard and seen and felt. I had buried them very deep. I had never listened to Bessie Smith in America, in the same way that for years I would not touch watermelon. But in Europe, she helped to reconcile me to being a nigger. Apologies for that word. I'm reading the actual book. Forgive me. I do not think that I could have made this reconciliation here. Once I was able to accept my role as distinguished, I must say, from my place in the extraordinary drama which is America, I was released from the illusion that I hated America. The story of what can happen to an American Negro writer in Europe simply illustrates, in some relief, what can happen to any American writer there. It is not meant, of course, to imply that it happens to them all, for Europe can be very crippling too. And anyway, a writer, when he has made his first breakthrough, has simply won a crucial skirmish in a dangerous, unending, and unpredictable battle. Still, the breakthrough is important, and the point is that an American writer, in order to achieve it, very often has to leave this country. The American writer in Europe is released first of all from the necessity of apologizing for himself. It is not until he is released from the habit of flexing his muscles and proving he is just a regular guy that he realizes how crippling this habit has been. It is not necessary for him there to pretend to be something he is not, for the artist does not encounter in Europe the same suspicion he encounters here. Whatever the Europeans may actually think of artists, they have killed enough of them off by now to know that they are real and as persistent as rain, snow, taxes, or businessmen. Of course, the reason for Europe's comparative clarity concerning the different functions of men in society is that European society has always been divided into classes in a way that American society never has been. A European writer considers himself to be part of an old and honourable tradition of intellectual activity, of letters, and his choice of a vocation does not cause him any uneasy wonder as to whether or not it will cost him all his friends. But this tradition does not exist in America. On the contrary, we have very deep-seated distrust of real intellectual effort, probably because we suspect that it will destroy, as I hope it does, the myth of America to which we cling to so desperately. An American writer fights his way to one of the lowest rungs on the American social ladder by means of pure bullheadedness and an indescribable series of odd jobs. He probably has been a regular fellow for much of his adult life, and it is not easy for him to step out of that lukewarm bath. We must, however, consider a serious paradox. Though American society is more mobile than Europe's, it is easier to cut across social and occupational lines there than it is here. This has something to do, I think, with the problems of status in American life. Where everyone has status, it is also perfectly possible, after all, that no one has. It seems inevitable in any case that a man may become uneasy as to just what status is. But Europeans have lived with the idea of status for a long time. A man can be as proud of being a writer as of being a good actor, and in neither case feel threatened. And this man that the actor and the waiter can have a freer and more genuinely friendly relationship in Europe than they are likely to have here. The waiter does not feel with obscure resentment that the actor has made it, and the actor is not tormented by the fear that he may find himself tomorrow once again a waiter. This lack of what may roughly be called social paranoia causes the American writer in Europe to feel, almost certainly for the first time in his life, that he can reach out to everyone, that he is accessible to everyone and open to everything. This is an extraordinary feeling. He feels, so to speak, his own weight, his own value. It is as though he suddenly came out of a dark tunnel and found himself beneath the open sky. And in fact, in Paris, I began to see the sky for what seemed to be the first time. It was borne in on me, and it did not make me feel melancholy that this sky had been there before I was born and would be there when I was dead. And it was up to me, therefore, to make of my brief opportunity the most that could be made. I was born in New York, but have lived only in pockets of it. In Paris, I lived in all parts of the city, on the right bank and on the left, among the bourgeoisie, among the Les Miserables, and knew all kinds of people, from pimps and prostitutes in Pigalle to Egyptian bankers in, forgive me, Neuilly. This may sound extremely unprincipled or even obscurely immoral. I found it healthy. I loved to talk to people, all kinds of people, and almost everyone, as I hope we still know, loves a man who loves to listen. The perpetual dealing with people, very differently from myself, caused a shattering in me of preconceptions I scarcely knew I held. The writer is meeting in Europe people who are not American, whose sense of reality is entirely different from his own. They may love or hate or admire or fear or envy this country. They see it, in any case, from another point of view. And this forces the writer to reconsider many things he had always taken for granted. This reassessment, which can be very painful, is also very valuable. This freedom, like all freedom, has its dangers and its responsibilities. One day it begins to be borne in on the writer, and with great force, that he is living in Europe as an American. If he were living there as a European, he would be living on a different and far less attractive continent. This crucial day may be the day on which an Algerian taxi driver tells him how it feels to be an Algerian in Paris. It may be the day on which he passes a cafe terrace and catches a glimpse of the tense, intelligent, and troubled face of Albert Camus. Or it may be the day on which someone asks him to explain Little Rock, and he begins to feel that it would be simpler and, corny as the words may sound, more honourable to go to Little Rock than sit in Europe on an American passport trying to explain it. This is a personal day, a terrible day, the day to which his entire sojourn has been tending. It is the day he realizes that there are no untroubled countries in this fearfully troubled world. That if he had been preparing himself for anything in Europe, he has been preparing himself for America. In short, the freedom that the American writer finds in Europe brings him full circle back to himself, with the responsibility for his development where it always was, in his own hands. Even the most incorrigible maverick has to be born somewhere. He may leave the group that produced him, he may be forced to, but nothing will efface his origins, the marks of which he carries with him everywhere. I think it is important to know this, and even find it a matter for rejoicing, as the strongest people do, regardless of their station. On this acceptance, literally, the life of a writer depends. The charge has often been made against American writers that they do not describe society and have no interest in it. They only describe individuals in opposition to it or isolated from it. Of course, what the American writer is describing is his own situation. But what is Anna Karenina describing if not the tragic fate of the isolated individual at odds with her time and place? The real difference is that Tolstoy was describing an old and dense society in which everything seemed, to the people in it, though not to Tolstoy, to be fixed forever. And the book is a masterpiece because Tolstoy was able to fathom and make us see the hidden laws which governed this society and made Anna's doom inevitable. American writers do not have a fixed society to describe. The only society they know is one in which nothing is fixed and in which the individual must fight for his identity. This is a rich confusion indeed, and it creates for the American writer unprecedented opportunities. That the tensions of American life, as well as the possibilities, are tremendous is certainly not even a question. But these are dealt with within contemporary literature mainly compulsively. That is, the book is more likely to be a symptom of our tension than an examination of it. The time has come, God knows, for us to examine ourselves, but we can only do this if we are willing to free ourselves from the myth of America and to try and find out what is really happening here. Every society is really governed by hidden laws, by unspoken but profound assumptions on the parts of the people, and ours is no exception. It is up to the American writer to find out what these laws and assumptions are. In a society much given to smashing taboos without thereby managing to be liberated from them, it will be no easy matter. It is no wonder, in the meantime, that the American writer keeps running off to Europe. He needs sustenance for his journey and the best models he can find. Europe has what we do not have yet, a sense of the mysterious and inexorable limits of life, a sense in a word, of tragedy, and we have what they sorely need, a new sense of life's possibilities. In this endeavour to wed the vision of the old world with that of the new, it is the writer, not the statesman, who is our strongest arm, though we do not wholly believe in it yet. The interior life is a real life, and the intangible dreams of people have an intangible effect on the world. Thank you very much if you've stayed with me this far. And again, apologies for that word that I used. Again, I'm reading James's own words, and I would be remiss if I censored what he wanted to say. So I hope that I don't get any hate. Anyway, thank you. I love you all. Peace out.